Radio, welcome to the most fun video in this entire Accelerator. It is gonna be about governance. Woo! I know, it's so fun. Hey, look, in short, there's a common misunderstanding when we talk about reporting and governance. You need really great reporting in order to govern well, or else the board doesn't have good data to make better decisions. And we're specifically going to talk a little bit more about ESG because there's a common misunderstanding that even if you're in a voluntary market, that it's actually not going to affect you. And that's not true because where disclosure isn't mandatory for, let's say, medium-sized businesses yet, or even large-sized businesses yet, you'll still be affected because if your customers are quite large and they rely on your products and services, you'll end up needing to report for their reporting line, and it goes upwards. And now, usually in videos, we share the learned experience and things at the end, but I thought it was actually better to do this at the start because there is no better way of driving the point than through actual experience. So I had a client last year coming to me. They had 2 weeks to fill out an emissions survey or something. I forgot what it was called. But essentially, they were not ready to do any of the reporting. They demanded emissions data. They demanded to know where they were in their goals, were they SBTi approved. They didn't even know where to start. And this client of theirs represented 70% of the revenue for that particular business unit. So they were up in arms. And the board wasn't ready for this. So the challenges that we start seeing with governance now in countries where it's voluntary, but they have clients and they export to clients who are overseas in places like the EU where it is mandatory, then they're facing some challenges now, such as a lack of initial data or systems to track emissions or anything else that they're trying to ask for. And of course, resistance also from their suppliers and internal teams to do that kind of reporting. And at the same time, navigating new and complex EU regulations. So now in 2025, at beginning of 2025, we have the Omnibus package, which is making things easier. But I'll just tell you now that actually, yes, it's sort of made it easier for companies now not needing to report. So many companies needing to report, but there's also less guidance, which is a real problem. So now you're essentially leaning on this concept called double materiality, where you decide what is material to report. You also communicate how you went about measuring and who audited your report, how they did that, and in order to do your climate sustainability ESG reporting. Right. So here are the challenges that we're currently seeing is that we have voluntary markets where, for example, you might be. So if you're in New Zealand, for example, it's a voluntary market. You don't have to, unless you earn more than $60 million in revenue and you hit certain aspects if you're a listed firm. But some of your suppliers are also coming from emerging markets. And therefore, you need to get your suppliers to report their emissions in order for you to figure out your emission data. So these are currently some of the biggest challenges right now in ESG or sustainability related conference, and it's all in data. And the risks now that we're seeing from companies not doing it is that they're actually losing potential tenders, because if you're doing tenders for larger organizations like councils, then I think up to 30% of their tender requirements are sustainability related elements. So looking at what you're doing in terms of biodiversity on construction sites or the sites that you're doing your work in, what kind of materials that you're using, what you're doing in the community. I'm sure that what I'm saying is things that are not new to you. So I'm just reminding you again that there are future revenue implications for not reporting and not looking over sustainability and ESG considerations. So losing customers, so current and future revenue. So it's tapping on that one. Losing strategic intel, because if you're doing reporting well, it's actually more information for your board to make better decisions. Not just board, leadership in general, because sustainability, as I've heard before in my videos, is essentially an efficiency problem, because the more efficiently you run your business, the more efficiently you make money, but also the more efficiently you run, the less energy that you're using, the less waste that's being produced, the less natural resources that you're producing. So there's a lot of strategic intel in sustainability data that will help you run your business better. And on that same token, more and more talent, especially the younger generation, are environmentally or socially leaning. So if you're not already having some kind of dialogue around it, you're going to be losing people because they think, well, you're kind of like a run-of-the-mill traditional company. I'm looking for a more progressive company that wants to make real change in our community, and I prefer to work for them. And then lastly is losing market leadership, generally because you'll see more and more firms talking about the impact that they have on community environment, especially in progressive markets like New Zealand, for example. So back to the basics. I did all that stuff first just to sort of bring out the lay of the land. And now we're going to talk about what I even mean by ESG. So ESG is just an acronym for environmental, social, and corporate governance. Environmental is pretty straightforward. So it's everything direct and indirectly coming from your business presence. So just by existing, you've got procurement dollars, and therefore anything up that supply chain is also your decision because you pick those suppliers. So anything up the chain as well as anything down the chain that impact the physical planet and living things is something that you need to report on. So that's why there's been so much frustration for companies like Coca-Cola who produce plastic bottles, and they end up everywhere. And even though Coke says, well, it's not our fault that people are littering or things like that, it's outside of our control, people say, well, we're buying your product for your drink, not your plastic bottle. You've had decades to change this and you're still refusing to. You're still saying recycling is the way, and clearly this is not the way. And clearly there's also been a ton of studies now showing that recycling is not going to be our way out of this. So that's the environmental piece. On social, so that's all direct and indirect outcomes up the supply chain and down to your land of life state on people. So the impact of your products and services on communities, as well as, again, your procurement dollars to check, for example, if there is child labor or modern slavery practices in place in order to have created your product. So nowadays it's important for you to check, and that's what the CSDDD is essentially about, this EU policy. And lastly here is governance. So this is just making sure that, yes, we're reporting on these things, but how are you actually running your firm? Is it independent? Are there clear structures and roles? Is there transparency? What kind of stakeholders do you engage with your employees? Do you have ethical conduct and integrity in your systems? Do you have effective risk management? Is there sustainability integration? How often do you review and improve processes in your firm? So all of that piece is governance, essentially to make sure that you are doing what you're going to say you're going to do, and you're actually measuring what it is that you're saying you're doing. So that's the ESG component. So the question then is, what are you actually reporting on? So as you can see here, we're looking at your current impact on people and planet. That was the E and the S we mentioned before. We're reporting on how you're measuring and auditing those things about the impact of your firm, as well as your plans to improve said outcomes. And lastly, the governance structure to ensure that there's integrity and things running in processes across all of those things. So just like what I mentioned before, that you've got independent directors, for example, making sure that all of this is running as it should be. So to make things easier, I've kind of summarized these into 4 first principles in governance for sustainability and ESG. So the first one is accountability. So making sure that decision makers are accountable for ESG performance. So assigning board level or leadership responsibility for ESG oversight. An example of that is like a sustainability officer or committee that regularly reports to the board, ensuring that ESG is a part of every strategic decision. So it comes up, making sure that the data is where it needs to be. And now, speaking of data, we have to make sure that all the data is transparent and you're able to show how you collected that data. So it's really important to automate quickly. And if you're not sure how, go and watch the video on measurement and you'll see the different ways that you can go about doing that at different levels. A lot of that is about reporting software and IoT. Or you could do a lot of things manually, but the point is that you actually need to show how you got that data and how you collected it. 3 and 4 are pretty straightforward. Integration into strategy, we speak about that in the strategy videos. And likewise with stakeholder engagement, I know you know now that you got to collaborate with your suppliers, your customers, your employees. So for example, a client's demand for your Scope 3 emissions data could lead you to co-create decarbonization strategies with your key suppliers as well. So what we're seeing with sort of ESG and sustainability work is that more and more it's about collaboration. So from learned experience, this is from people who have done it in the past, the people I've interviewed, and the four kind of main things that keep coming up. And the first one is to start early. So we had a company that said we began with basic emission estimates, and as they improved their software and improved their processes, they were able to not use estimates and actually just use the data that actually came about. And there are moments where emission estimates were lower than actually what they were doing, and in their annual report they just had to say why that was, right? So progress matters more than perfection in that instance. Number two, you want to engage suppliers proactively. So suppliers often don't know what's required, and this company holds workshops to educate and align them with their goals. And now you're seeing large tech companies putting entire funds out. So like H&M has funds available for education capacity building for all of the factories that supply them with their clothes. So you're seeing that more and more now, the commitment from larger corporations to actually make real change, which is kind of cool. Number three, simplify the process. So they focused on low-hanging fruit first. So for example, switching to renewable energy. And I guess you could, because you just buy green contracts. So there are ways of doing this that you can speak to your providers about, and providing logistical efficiency. So I love that one. You definitely want to simplify it, because unfortunately sustainability is complicated. It's about how you do everything, but you can't do everything at once. So you pick the things that you can do and you simplify it as much as you can. And number four, really important, is to celebrate small wins. So when you hit small milestones, like cutting emissions by 20%, which is huge, it boosts morale and it keeps the momentum going. And remember, in the diffusion of innovation, you've always got laggards or loud people in the company or on the board who will always push back on this. And it's fine, push back on it. But if you're not celebrating your wins, then their voices are just a little louder. So make sure that you celebrate your wins. So I'm now going to jump on a mural and introduce you to the infinite loop of governance. Right, so introducing the infinite loop of governance. This is pretty standard, and it's like governance 101, how this sort of should be working. It tells you who should be in which role. So for example, you have an operating group over here, and then you have the governance group over here, which kind of oversee, and everybody's got their responsibilities, right? And it also helps you outline when you look at it at these different points. I'll share this as a PDF in the description, so you will find that. But it also informs you where you could be using different tools. So for example, things like AI, actually AI should be used at all levels to help you with data analysis and recommendations. You're still making the final decisions, it's not the AI. But if you're able to save even 20% of your time thanks to AI, you should totally use it. And that's the equivalent of saving an entire extra meeting every 5 meetings, or even better, just achieving better outcomes because AI has given you better analysis. Right? So this infinite loop is a classic governance framework. The people providing oversight should not be the ones operating. There comes an immediate conflict of interest. So that board member, if they are helping or they're involved here, they might be voting a certain way because they're directly involved in the particular initiative. That's why we talk about independence when it comes to directors. So this insight is a key empathy gap that operational staff are rarely taught. We don't tell people why the guys up here don't get down here. It's because of that conflict of interest, and that process exists for a reason. Now, people in oversight positions can help, but they have to disclose it and refrain from voting so neutral and clear decision making can take place if that happens. So that's an insight as to why it looks this way, is because you want to make sure that there's no overlap and no conflict of interest. And definitely tell people, because that doesn't happen enough. So let's go one by one through this. Actually, when you first begin, I will also share this into the gap here. Best practice of introducing a sustainability working group, but that's not today. But when it does kick in, you introduce it. So that's the initiatives, clearly outlined when they're going to happen, with which prioritized initiatives. New initiatives coming through this way, work plans and budgets are also input. So when those things happen, you have whoever's the leader also with a board member to say, yeah, that's definitely happening and we're all on board and you've got approval. And once that happens, you've got some level of communication happening, right, between the two groups. Here I've written SLT, which is senior leadership team, but that could also just be your board. and the working groups coordinating and organizing themselves. You can read this on your own time. So I'll just say that 1 and 2 are actually the same points. 2 is just when it's running, and 1 when, you know, the initiative just gets input. So after you communicate, then you go off and do it. So we've got some best practices that we can share about how you do your meetings to make sure they're significantly faster. They already concurrently exist with other work. Progress is tracked, and this section is where coordination and work outside with other stakeholders takes place as well. So that's where the execution happens, and you're working with your suppliers and your contractors or whoever. And then even within this team, you're evaluating every quarter, every month. You're updating it using data, of course, capturing that data. And then number 5, internally, you're still redeveloping the planning, because as we know, it's never perfect the first time. So you're iterating at this level within the scope that you can. But of course, once budgets happen and things like that, then it goes to the board. But already at your level, you can start iterating things like, do you want to use this type of material or that type of material? Well, typically that's something that you make as a decision within your group. And you'll see that in the middle, there's monitoring and evaluation happening at every step. How we communicate, you're keeping meeting minutes, how you're executing, you're capturing that data, you're storing that data, and you're also keeping track of the changes that are happening when you're redeveloping those plans, right? And then you report that over to the board. So that happens at the communication phase, right? And the biggest challenges go to them. That's why they're at the top. You get the most experienced people handling some of the hardest challenges that they can get. So once they get it, they get communicated that, it's their job, your board's job, to learn and analyze. So they're cross-examining things. They get all kinds of intel. So typically when you're on a board, you're on other boards as well, or you're running a business, you know a lot of people. So you're cross-checking things that are going on in your network. You're reviewing inventory resources, so things which the operational team might not be privy to. And you're checking them with reports from other areas, other departments as well, to verify. And after that intel kind of like analysis phase, then you start prioritizing and troubleshooting. So this is where the discussion, the sort of troubleshooting actually happens. And then after that, they come back and they align and approve and say, okay, as a board, let's vote. What are we actually going to do? And then once that plan is agreed upon, then that gets communicated back over here into this loop, where the operational team go off and do what they need to do, right? So you'll see here that the board or oversight committee has all of their own jobs, and they're going to get some really tough questions. And I will say that when I'm on the ground, typically I hear a lot of frustration, outward frustration going this way, but just know that this is what they're supposed to be doing. And if this is you and you're not doing this, then now you know. So if you're in this team, to best utilize this relationship, your role is to go up to them and say, hey, look, we've done the work, we've done the mahi, and we now have sort of 3 options that we think we could be taking, but here's our recommendation with the associated costs and benefits. What decision do you think that we should take? Then the board's role is to understand, debate, learn, and come back to the best possible decision to take, and then pass that on for the team to go ahead and do. So that now concludes our crash course on governance. We have a dedicated skill drill on this in the Business Sustainability Accelerator. So if you have any questions, send us a DM and we will respond. Otherwise, recommend for you to map your own infinite loop and see what comes up. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.